They were a member of the Border Conference when they were known as Texas Mines. They won a national championship when they were known as Texas Western. UTEP will be returning to its Western roots when they join the Mountain West. Nearly a year ago, the Pac-12 and Mountain West inked a $14 million scheduling agreement, and one major clause of that scheduling agreement was definitive transaction, which basically said the parties will negotiate in good faith a definitive transaction to where all Mountain West schools would join the Pac-12. Now, it did not guarantee a merger, but it said that there would be good faith negotiations for one. Another major clause was the withdrawal fee, otherwise known as the poaching penalty fees. This clause outlined a sliding scale of how much the Pac-12 would owe the Mountain West if it were to poach Mountain West schools. Ultimately, the Pac-12 poached 5 Mountain West schools, putting their poaching penalty fees at $55 million owed to the Mountain West. And that $55 million in poaching penalty fees, combined with the exit fees of the schools departing the Mountain West, would make up the Mountain West war chest. And that war chest would come into play with the memorandum of understanding that the Mountain West schools just had to sign for their GOR, when Commissioner Navarez had to put together a financial package to entice the Mountain West schools to stay, particularly Air Force and UNLV. There were a couple major factors for why Commissioner Navarez identified Air Force and UNLV as the two schools she had to front load that war chest for in order to keep. The first was leverage. Air Force had the leverage of going to the American, where they could free up 2 out-of-conference slots by making Army and Navy conference games, while UNLV had the leverage of going to the Pac-12. The second came down to media value. Looking at Mountain West regular season conference games only from 2013 to 2023, so 11 years, if we look into the green columns, that measures the over-under percentage compared to the opponent's average on the network. So it's isolating both the network and the opponent. And Air Force came second in that category, as their regular season conference games over those 11 years would average being 11.5% above their opponent's average on that same network. UNLV, despite being a bottom feeder for many of those years, came in 6th. And with that program on the upswing, moving from Sam Boyd Stadium into the new NFL stadium, logically UNLV's ratings should only improve going forward. So having established that Air Force and ULV were the schools with other options, and the schools remaining that likely had the highest media value, Commissioner Navarez identified them as the kingpins she needed to tailor her financial package for in order to keep the conference together. And the MOU spells out how she redistributed the Mountain West war chest. Bucket 1 would be the first $61 million, and Air Force and UNLV apiece would have 24.5%, while Nevada, New Mexico, San Jose State, and Wyoming would have an 11.5% apiece, and Hawaii would take the remaining 5%. After the first $61 million would be $18 million in Bucket 2. That $18 million would be put into a recruiting reserve to attract new schools to the league. Bucket 3 would be the next $21 million after that first $79 million, and that reverted back to the same tiered percentages as Bucket 1. Air Force and ULV getting 24.5% each, Nevada, New Mexico, San Jose State, and Wyoming getting 11.5% each, and Hawaii the remaining 5%. Then after that first $100 million in those first 3 buckets expired, Bucket 4 would cover legal fees and other expenses that is an undisclosed amount. And the final bucket, Bucket 5, would be the remainder of the war chest of what's left over. And that would be more evenly split. The first 95% would be split evenly, 15.83% between AFA, UNLV, Nevada, New Mexico, San Jose State, Wyoming, and then the remaining 5% to Hawaii. That brings us to this chart breaking down the Mountain West war chest redistribution. In a best case scenario for the Mountain West, their war chest would consist of $55 million in poaching fees from the Pac-12, and then $87.5 million in exit fees from the 5 departing Mountain West schools, who would be paying $17.5 million each. That potential war chest would total $142.5 million. The first column on the chart is where the money goes: UNLV, AFA, Wyoming, Nevada, New Mexico, San Jose State, Hawaii, new members, and then legal fees and other expenses. The next column over is Bucket 1, that first $61 million. UNLV and Air Force would take home $14.945 million, while Wyoming, Nevada, New Mexico, and San Jose State would take home $7.015 million, and then Hawaii $3.05 million. Bucket 2 would be the next $18 million, or $61 million to $79 million, and that $18 million would go into a recruiting reserve for new members. Bucket 3 would be the following 21 million, or 79 million to 100 million, and that would consist of 5.145 million for UNLV and AFA, and 2.415 million for Wyoming, Nevada, New Mexico, and San Jose State, and 1.05 million for Hawaii. Now, bucket 4 would be for legal fees and other expenses. This amount was undisclosed, so we really have no idea how much it would be, and I'm going to use 1.5 million as the max. Of course, that is just speculation. Now, bucket 5 would be all of the money in the war chest that's left over. So if the Mount West got all of its 142.5 million, then that would mean that there's 41 million left over in bucket 5. We know the first 95% will be split evenly between UNLV, Air Force, Wyoming, Nevada, New Mexico, and San Jose State. So that could be anywhere from $0 to 6.49 million, depending if the Mount West recoups all the exit fees and poaching penalties or not. And for Hawaii, that would be anywhere from $0 to 2.05 million. So if we look at the total of buckets 1 through 4 in the second to last column, so that would be the first 100 million plus the legal fees, UNLV and Air Force would have 20.09 million, Wyoming, Nevada, New Mexico, and San Jose State would have 9.43 million, Hawaii 4.1 million, and then 18 million in a recruiting reserve for the new members. If we look at the final column, which is the best case scenario where the Mount West was able to recoup every single dollar in poaching penalties and exit fees, UNLV and Air Force would make 26.58 million. Wyoming, Nevada, New Mexico, and San Jose State would get 15.92 million, and Hawaii would get 6.15 million. 18 million put in a recruiting reserve, and then up to 1.5 million would go to legal fees and other expenses. That's a speculated number. UTEP immediately brings value to the Mount West by making the Mount West compliant with an NCAA bylaw. That bylaw is 20.02.9, where it says a conference classified as a FBS conference shall be composed of at least 8 full FBS members that satisfy all FBS requirements. An institution shall be included as one of the 8 full FBS members only if the institution participates in the conference schedule in at least 6 men's and 8 women's conference-sponsored sports, including men's basketball and football, and 3 women's team sports, including women's basketball. Right now, the Mount West has 6 such full FBS members in UNLV, Air Force, Wyoming, New Mexico, Nevada, and San Jose State, and UTEP gets them to 7, which is 1 away from the required 8, and that 8th is likely to be Hawaii, but that's to be determined. Looking at athletic revenues, and UTEP's athletic revenues in Sportico, the Knight Commission, were 40.7 million, which would be at the bottom of the Mount West, but within 10 million of San Jose State, New Mexico, Nevada, and Wyoming. Looking at football expenses, UTEP's 11.6 million would put them slightly above San Jose State, New Mexico, and Air Force. Looking at men's basketball expenses, UTEP's 4.7 million in Sportico would put them above Air Force, San Jose State, and Wyoming. In all, UTEP's athletic budget was at the bottom of the Mount West, but their football and men's basketball budgets were right in the middle of the Mount West. Here are the 10-year rankings in Sagarin. A point of clarification, I did not include the new FBS schools moving up to Conference USA. However, I did include James Madison, even though they recently moved up, and that's because James Madison's 10-year Sagarin still came out to be 69th, despite so many of those years being an FCS. Now, UTEP's 10-year Sagarin would come out to be 128th of FBS schools. For the Mount West, you have Air Force in 57th, Wyoming in 87th, Nevada 104th, San Jose State 109th, Hawaii 113th, UNLV 116th, and New Mexico 118th. Looking at the group of 6 conferences, you have the Pac-12 way out in front of everyone. The American and Sun Belt are pretty close to even, and then the MAC and Mount West are virtually tied. Looking at 10-year KenPom rankings for men's basketball, I've decided to include Hawaii for the Mount West. I'm putting the cart before the horse there. UTEP's 10-year KenPom would be 178th, and of the Mount West schools, Nevada would be 75th, UNLV 110th, New Mexico 115th, Wyoming 153rd, Hawaii, if they join, 162nd, Air Force 252nd, and San Jose State 297th. On a conference scale at the moment, you have the Pac-12 in 6th, the A-10 in 7th, Missouri Valley in 8th, American in 9th, West Coast in 10th, and Mount West in 11th. This graph charts UTEP's football attendance since 2005, going from the bottom to top is 10,000 average attendance to 50,000 average attendance, and then going from left to right is the average wins of the current season plus the previous season combined. And the reason I do that is because the previous season's record often will impact the following season's attendance. Since 2005, UTEP only had 2 years where the current season and the previous season combined averaged more than 6 wins. That came in 2005 when they had an 8-win average between that season and the previous season, and their attendance average was 47,899. And then the following year in 2006, that average came down to 6.5, and their attendance was still over 42,000. In fact, UTEP has only had 3 years since 2005 where they were better than 6-6 in the regular season. 2005, where they averaged 47,899 attendance during an 8-3 regular season. 2014, 9 years later, when they averaged 28,377 in a 7-5 regular season. And then 7 years after that in 2021, where they averaged 16,811 during a 7-5 regular season. However, it's important to note that that was at the tail end of a pandemic, and that 2021 followed years of 0-12, 1-11, 1-11, and 3-5, which had to take a toll on the fan base. Overall, this scatter plot shows the untapped potential of UTEP's fan base if they could ever simply be a contender in their conference. Delving a little deeper into attendance, here are UTEP's 5 highest attended games since 2019 on the left, and then on the right is taking the 6 Mount West schools not named Air Force, their 5 highest attended games combined since 2019. And you can see line for line 1 through 5, UTEP actually beats those 6 non-Air Force Mount West schools. And that's despite that Mount West 6, their top 5 games, including 3 against Power 4 opponents, won a Mount West championship game against Boise State and 1 FCS, while UTEP's top 5 games were against 2 schools now in the American in North Texas and UTSA, and 3 FCS schools. UTEP drew 45,971 against North Texas, 41,609 against Southern Utah, 34,646 against Houston Christian, 31,658 against UTSA, and 30,738 against UIW. So you could see the potential of UTEP's fan base if the Miners could ever sustain success in football or have a Cinderella season. For men's basketball attendance, UTEP averaged 4,552 in 2022-2023. That would put them right in the middle of the Mount West, if we're including Hawaii. UTEP's geographic isolation puts them in a unique position where there's no NFL, NHL, NBA, or MLB teams around, or Power 4 teams. And the result of that is there's a lot of potential for UTEP to dominate the sports and entertainment dollar in El Paso. This interactive map shows Vivid Seats data where UTEP was the most popular team in El Paso County, at least by the metric of ticket sales data. Now, if you are not a believer in the Vivid Seats data, there's the New York Times data. And despite nearly all of Texas and actually quite a bit of New Mexico bleeding orange for the Longhorns, the area of El Paso was actually able to hold serve for UTEP. The New York Times notes that only 5 programs in Texas that were not the Longhorns were able to hold serve in their hometowns, that those being Texas A&M and College Station, Baylor and Waco, TCU and Fort Worth, Texas Tech and Lubbock, and UTEP in El Paso. So 4 A4 schools and then UTEP. On top of that Vivid Seats data, New York Times data, is Twitter data compiled by Matt Sorensen. His data measures the percentage of Twitter users in a county that follow a particular program on Twitter. And remarkably, his data revealed that in El Paso County, for every person that followed Texas football, there were almost 4 people who followed UTEP football. His data came out to be 39.1% for UTEP in El Paso County, while Texas just had 10.5%. All of that is a function of El Paso's status of being one of 5 top 75 metropolitan areas without an NFL, NHL, NBA, or MLB team, who are also over 200 miles from the nearest A4 Big East school. In fact, El Paso is 320 miles from the nearest A4 Big East school or an NFL, NHL, NBA, or MLB team. Those 5 metropolitan areas are Honolulu with Hawaii at number 55, Albuquerque with New Mexico at number 61. There's McAllen, Texas at number 65. However, note that while number 65 in MSA population, it has the lowest per capita income and lowest median income of all metropolitan areas, which means they have a lot less disposable income due to their unfortunate economic situation. And on top of that, UTRGV hasn't even played their first FCS game yet. Then there's El Paso with UTEP at number 68 and Boise at number 74 with Boise State. So really, putting the unique exception of McAllen aside, we have 4 top 75 metropolitan areas that have that unique distinction, and it's really showed in the fan support, whether it was consistently or during a Cinderella season. Hawaii averaged 43,514 attendance during their Sugar Bowl season in 2007, while New Mexico has sustained 11,000 attendance in men's basketball. UTEP averaged 47,899 attendance in 2005 for merely going 8-4, and then you have Boise State, who sustained 35,000 attendance in football. All this to say that there's a lot of blue ocean out in El Paso for the sports and entertainment dollar if UTEP could ever sustain success or have a dream season. Back when UTEP was known as Texas Mines, they were a member of the Border Conference, and around 1949 they would switch from Texas Mines to Texas Western. They would be in the Border Conference for about 27 years when the Border Conference would fall apart after the Arizona schools left and formed the WAC. Texas Western would win a national championship in 1966 as an independent, and then the school would shortly after become UTEP and join the WAC in 1968. UTEP would be in the WAC through a few iterations, including the expansion to the WAC 16, which would later fall apart after the Airplane 5 coup, which created the Mount West. UTEP would be in the WAC for 37 years until 2005. When UTEP would move eastward and join Conference USA, UTEP would be a part of Conference USA for multiple iterations, and overall they will have spent 21 years in Conference USA until they join the Mountain West in 2026.